Good morning and good afternoon, colleagues from around the world, and welcome to the FCGA annual webinar, this year themed The Future of Work. Today it is my privilege to lead the Fibre Council Global Alliance annual 2021 project. For those who do not know who the Fibre Council Global Alliance is, the FCGA consists of 5 councils co-representing the fibre industry in regions across the world. In 2012, the 5 councils came together in Munich, Germany, and signed an MOU to outline this Memorandum of Understanding. The FCGA comprises of Europe, the Americas, which includes North America and Latin America, Middle East and North Africa, or as MENA, as well as Asia Pacific. The Council signed an MOU to strengthen its collaboration and to drive the message of the need for high-speed broadband connectivity across the globe. The FCGA meets regularly to collaborate on general topics of interest within the fibre community, and one such initiative is its widely used global definition of terms, which many of you may use. Since I joined the FCGA almost a decade ago, many faces have changed, and as a result, I've been privileged to work with some of the greatest minds in the global sector. People that have truly understood the industry, that have an in-depth knowledge of the challenges that face their respective regions, and have a clear understanding of the policy and the regulatory environment that is needed to shape our regions. In my engagement with the FCGA, I've been privileged to spend time in Brussels with the European Commission, who extensively presented their broadband strategy and their vision for Europe. And I've had the privilege to meet with the Federal Communications Commission in Washington, who in turn share the challenges of broadband in rural America. The leaders in the respective regions have immense convening power and influence, and I'm sure that every person here today will walk away having learned something. So now it gives me great pleasure to introduce this phenomenal team. Can we have the next slide, please? Combined, the FCGA leadership, as you see before you now, serve more than 550 member companies from 6 regions in the world, all with a single mission. That is to expand the interest of high-speed broadband and to represent your interests. On this webinar today, we have Gary Bolton, President and CEO of the Fibre Broadband Association in North America, Vincent Garnier, Director General of the FTTH Council Europe, Khulud Aldorgam, Director General of the FTTH Council MENA, Rusafi Alam, General Manager of the FTTH Council Asia Pacific, and Nelson Saito, President of the FTTH Council LATAM. As mentioned before, the FCGA strive to develop annual work which often culminates in a green or a white paper. In early 2021, we thought it appropriate to consider the pandemic and its impact on the sector. More specifically, we wanted to better understand what impact access to broadband had on the workforce, amongst other things. This research that we are presenting you today was conducted globally, but mainly between the first and the second wave of the pandemic. Before I hand over to our keynote speaker, allow me to do a little bit of housekeeping. During the presentation, there will be 2 polls which we will ask you to participate in. Of course, you don't have to, but it would be great. These questions may focus on research which we will share with you this morning. However, the aim is to see if there has been a change in the last few months since we've done our research. Then we will move on to a short roundtable discussion at the end of the presentation. So feel free to post your comments and questions in the question box throughout the session. Also, we'd like you to introduce yourself in the chat if you so wish. It's always nice and interesting to know who has joined us and where you are from. Lastly, allow me to thank the Fibre Broadband Association, and in particular, Deborah Kish, the Vice President for Research and Marketing. You guys have certainly done all the heavy lifting in this research paper, and it would not have been possible without your support. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Mr. Gary Bolton, and invite him to take over and share the research findings with you. Enjoy the webinar, everyone.
Thank you, Juanita, and welcome everybody. So I'm Gary Bolton, the President and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association. And as Juanita said, Debbie Kish did a great job of pulling together the survey that we sent out globally. And so we really wanted to look and just see, as we come out of this pandemic, how's the world going to change and what will the future of work look like? And so go ahead to the next slide, Trish. So we looked at our methodology, and what we did is we did a survey we conducted over a 2-week period. And this survey, the similar survey, was sent out to the 6 different regions of the world that Juanita laid out. We had a little over around 500 respondents, and we want to make sure that you understand this. Results may be a little bit skewed because we did send it out to our industry. So this is going to be broadband savvy people that are in the telecom industry. But it had a various number of different roles, from management and C-levels to architects, engineers, marketing professionals, consultants, investors. And so the results did show that we ended up with about a third of our, go ahead, next slide, Trish. Yeah, about a third of our respondents were network operators, a third were vendors and suppliers, and then the last third were contractors and others. So we did have a really good mix of respondents, and the respondents largely came from North America and LATAM, so about 3/4 were from North America and LATAM, with Europe then being about 12%, and then the remaining 12%, 13% was the rest of the world. Go ahead, next slide. Yeah, so really I'm gonna break down, kind of give you a Quentin Tarantino, where we'll give you the results first and then kind of walk through the survey. So one of the first key findings we found was on a work from home policy. And this might not surprise you, but most companies really did not have a work from home policy prior to the pandemic. And we all woke up one morning and found out that we'll all be working from home on Monday. And so every company around the world scrambled to figure out how to allow their employees to work from home, and who was mission critical and had to come in if you had production and other things. And so what we're seeing is that now, coming out of the pandemic, about 80% of companies do have a work from home policy. And that's going to be very key. If you think about prior to the pandemic, going on a Zoom meeting was not very popular. Video conferencing didn't really work great. And, we were all jumped on airplanes and ran around the world for 30-minute meetings. And now, coming out of the pandemic, I know I went to a meeting in Maine on Friday, and there's a lot of traveling to go sit on a panel for an hour. So we're all starting to get addicted to being able to reach around the world, as we are doing this morning, and do it very conveniently. The other key finding, which is really important, is that internet is no longer a luxury. Before, when we could go to the office, we came home and we were watching Netflix, or basically using the internet as entertainment. And now we're seeing that with school from home, work from home, that the internet is mission critical. And that's why that's important, is it's really driving the need for fiber around the world. And we're seeing that no one's asking why anymore. They're saying, how do I get more fiber? Go ahead to the next slide, Trish. And then the other thing about, now that we're all kind of in this work from home environment, is we can work from anywhere. And so, we've seen a lot of postal code studies and things that see people moving out of high cost areas into more rural areas, big exodus from large cities. But in our study, we found that 83% have not relocated after becoming a remote worker. And so we thought that was an interesting result, because it's a little contrary to what we're seeing with Zoom towns and so forth. And so we're still trying to figure out what does that mean, but we think what it means is that our industry is largely where people want to live. And then the fourth key finding is that people felt safe. When we're in a global pandemic, the ability to shelter in place, be able to be productive and work without having to go out and be at risk. I think people found that extremely beneficial. And so we saw that not only with work from home, but being able to go to the doctor, being able to do a telehealth session where you're not having to go into a crowded waiting room, and just being able to get anywhere we need to be in the world virtually. Go ahead, Trish. So when we look at the internet from a connectivity perspective, we see is that on the chart on the right, the gray area is fiber from home. So a lot of our recipients or respondents across the globe were largely fiber to the home. But you did see cable is in that gold area. So cable is pretty prominent in the first 3 bars, but you didn't see any cable in the Middle East and North Africa or Sub-Saharan Africa. Also, what you saw is a lot of wireless in the Middle East, North Africa, and a little bit in Europe, and as well as in Sub-Saharan Africa. And then you only saw satellite in North America and Sub-Saharan Africa. And so this will become really important as we look at the rest of the study. But we were seeing that there was a lot of, as people had mission critical broadband from their house, there became a lot of confusion on what is the internet versus Wi-Fi or wireless. And we saw a lot of issues with cable and DSL. Also, we did see, it was interesting, in Latin America, there was a high fiber respondents of 63%, but they also cited lack of connectivity as being a big issue, which is in those areas that wasn't, where there wasn't fiber available. Go ahead to the next slide. So as I mentioned, when the cable broadband was viewed inefficient, as insufficient around the world, bandwidth and connectivity is 44% of the issues that we saw from regionally around the world. And then also troubleshooting, trying to ensure that all of you that work from home, know that you're trying to, you don't have an IT team that can run over and fix your computer and get things up. So we were doing all kinds of shift control, alt delete, and restarting our computers and kind of brute force tactics, or just trying to figure out how to get back up and going. Also, bandwidth rationing was a big issue, and we saw that in the North America study we did during the pandemic, independent research that showed that the rural areas that had 4 megabits by 1 megabit were spending 11 hours a week rationing bandwidth. So basically, if you're a family of 4 and you have your kids online and your spouse is trying to do a Zoom video and you're trying to schedule saying, everybody off the internet, I got an important meeting on Zoom, so it's kind of like hot water where you're trying to ration your available bandwidth. Go ahead, next slide. So from a technology investment perspective, we saw the largest area of investment was in areas of antivirus and anti-phishing and malware, and then with data security being number 2. Which was interesting is in the Middle East, North Africa, you see a high investment in the antivirus and malware software, backup drives, and then also, as we talked about, they had the largest number of people connected by wireless. So they have to make sure that their router backup went to LTE. Interesting, the data security investment was lowest in North America. And I think you saw if you read the news, you saw that the US had a lot of issues with security breaches and so forth, although it was the highest in Sub-Saharan Africa. And then you really didn't see much in the way of investment in technology and software from both North America and Latin America. So basically the Western Hemisphere really didn't put a lot of investment into security, which is surprising. Although Latin America did have the highest in-home network software security at 13%. Go ahead, next slide. So from ICT and IT subsidies, what we saw is the region with the lowest equipment subsidies were Latin America, Middle East, and North Africa, and Asia Pacific. The areas with the highest equipment subsidies were Europe at 58% and Sub-Saharan Africa at 62%. And then we also saw that there was no investment at all in some areas where employees ended up buying their own equipment or their equipment, was taken from home. So we get into next slide. We start looking at the procurement and production. So I think everybody around the world is seeing, shortages, whether it's toilet paper or eggs or coffee or whatever you might be looking for. And so we saw that 39% of our respondents saw an increase in procurement and production forecasts, which is not surprising. So we did see disruptions in supply chains. Deadlines and meeting times were missed, product produced in lower quantities. So we saw a hesitancy to forecast beyond 3 years, a lot of uncertainty on the future. And so North Africa, Europe, and Asia Pacific saw the lowest in downward forecasts, and Asia Pac had the highest upward forecast of 70%. With that, I think we're going to go to a poll question. So if you guys could, I'll take a few minutes here to respond, but as we're starting to emerge from the pandemic in certain regions around the world, some a little better than others, will you return to the office by the end of 2021? And we wanted to see how your answers matched with our poll. So, the first choice is yes, 100% you'll be there. The second choice is yes, but more on a rotational basis. The third is yes at a 50% capacity. And the last is no, we're going to continue to work from home. And that'll be interesting to see how we end up with. So I guess we'll close our poll. And we saw that, I'm going to just pull up here what we saw with the, so our poll here ends up at 38% yes versus we had a Eastern Hemisphere webinar this morning. We saw that was 17%, so that's quite a bit different. 25% yes on a rotational basis, which was 34% this morning. Yes at 50%, 13%, and we saw that at 23%. And no, 25% this morning, we saw that at 26%. So go ahead to the next slide and see how we fared. So as you can see that it was pretty close to what you came across on our poll here. So we are seeing that kind of, the majority of folks will continue at home, with the second largest one being on a rotational basis, which I think that I know I've enjoyed being able to work from my home, being able to see the efficiency gains I have from being able to do that, not spending time commuting, avoiding a lot of travel. So I think a lot of people around the world are enjoying the same thing and want to continue to some extent in that mode. Go ahead to the next. So we wanted to have another polling question. And so this is really interesting because, when we went to work from home, I know that all employers were concerned about productivity. And so did you think your productivity increased, decreased, or stayed the same while you were working from home? And we'll give that a minute or two. And I know that, that's the biggest issue that we saw is how do we measure productivity for people working from home? And, I know personally, it really increased my productivity because I went from, filling the day to being more success oriented and, having to prioritize my activities much greater because, I only had so much time to be able to get things done. So let's see, do you have the polling results? Great. So at increased to 62%. So this morning in the Eastern Hemisphere, we were at 48%. Decreased is 10%. We're at 17% on the European side, and then stayed the same as 29%. So same kind of trend. So go to the next slide. Yeah, so as you can see that the majority of our respondents on the survey saw that we would increase productivity with the smallest amount being decreased, and then a significant portion of that audience thought it would stay the same. All right, go to the next slide. So when we're looking at, how do we measure productivity? And this is a big challenge for employers. And, so I think, what we saw on the poll here is task tracking was one of the most popular areas, as well as measuring as a team or business unit, and then milestone tracking. And so we see, no real consistency across companies, but being able to track performance. And I think it's going to be much more result oriented as we move forward. All right, so then with that, we'll go to the last slide here, and that's so hopefully you see in your handouts we have a copy of the white paper that was released globally, and it has a lot more details of what we hit on the discussion here. So with that, I'd like to turn it back to Juanita, and so we can get into some our roundtable discussion on the differences across the globe.
Thank you very much, Gary. Very efficient, and you've saved us a lot of time. This morning we almost ran out of time, and I'm glad you sort of sped it up a little bit so we can continue with the conversation. So we're going to just look at a little bit of recommendations. If we can go to the next slide, please. Just by way of recapping, since Gary's now done his presentation, what some of the recommendations we'd like to make is to take a few initiatives with priorities to set a policy and to revisit delivery metrics, to educate employees on online tools that can be used to capture the work from home opportunity. I think certainly across the globe, we've seen that, we spoke about it prior to the session as well. Employees were really catapulted into, the work from home opportunity. So suddenly they had to start learning how to use collaboration tools. They had to find their own sort of rhythm at home, and this took time, and it led to a lot of frustrations, I think, from employers and from managers and senior managers. And I suspect that in the very beginning of the pandemic, we would have definitely seen a massive drop in productivity as people were just coming to terms with, expectations, how they were trying to deliver their jobs. Many had bandwidth limitations. There was a lot of education that was needed. But I think it's time that policies are revisited, that we also look at different metrics, and that employees need education, not just in terms of, technical education on how to use, collaboration tools and digital tools, but also in terms of how to manage your productivity. One of the things that we're currently seeing, and if you follow some of the conversations on the professional platforms, you'll see that people are not taking a lunch break. And it almost looks like we're going to see the return of the lunch break, where people block out a diary in the middle of the day between 12:30 and 1:30 or 1 and 2, just to go and grab a cup of coffee, stare at a tree, and get a sandwich, because we're fast learning that people are, the moment they sit down behind their screens, they don't move until they leave the screen. So we need to be careful that there's not, that we're not overburdening people, and that there's not massive screen fatigue. Then one of the other things, and this is a very controversial, call it point, is that where possible, offer a subsidy to employees to encourage them to follow the company vision to work from home. We're going to have a little bit of a conversation about this now, because as much as there's this dialogue to say, we can offer a subsidy, there's also some companies that says that, if you work from home, there's a national cost saving, and therefore, there should be at a minimum an offset, or packages should be renegotiated. And then there's a use of combination of tools to measure productivity at both a business unit and a company-wide level. Things have changed. We're entering a world now where, KPI should be measured differently. And it's this whole opportunity to reset the way that we've historically done business, and how we've looked at our workforce and how KPIs are delivered. Are we moving into a pure KPI-driven world where at the end of the day, we only want to make sure that you've delivered on your task at hand? Or do we still want to measure in the old-fashioned ways? We've got to agree that, different generations are probably productive at different times of the day. So if Mr. X would like to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to write his report, then are we saying that that should be his option? And then and how do we then measure that productivity? One of the other things that's not on these recommendations, but that's a very interesting conversation now, is the fear of the loss of the company culture. And the question here is, are we now moving to a more individual culture where the individual matters more than the company? Or do we still want to instill a certain company culture? And if the answer is yes, then how do we do that? And how do we pull everybody into a very specific culture? And then, of course, procurement and production forecast should no longer be 3 years and out. I think there's a sense that it should be shorter because there's less uncertainty. And then there's advocate for fiber to the home to support work from home. So I think at this point we're going to go into our panel discussion. And I'd like to bring on the rest of the team that will be supporting me in this. It's a great privilege to have everybody with us this afternoon. Welcome back, Gary. Thank you for a very excellent presentation. Of course, Vincent Garnier, who's the Director General of the FTTH Council Europe. Welcome, Vincent. It's about 4:30, I think, with you in the afternoon now. And then Rusafi Alam, the General Manager at Asia Pacific. Rusafi is based in Bangladesh, and I'm not sure. I think it's late afternoon in Bangladesh, if I'm right, or Gelut Aldorgham. Evening, apologies. Gelut Aldorgham. Gelut is the Director General for the Middle East and North Africa, and Nelson Saito, who's the President of the Fiber Broadband Association, LATAM chapter. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for coming back to us and joining us this afternoon just for a general discussion. Just as a reminder, if there's any questions or comments, you're welcome to post it into the chat. It's a very interesting conversation that we're having today because I think this conversation represents a lot of our own uncertainties. I think we're to a large extent torn between missing the office and the social interaction. And I think if a lot of people are honest with themselves, I think that's the big part that we're missing. It's just coming together around the coffee machine or the water cooler and just having the general conversation, because that sort of dies down in a virtual environment to some extent. As opposed to the quality of life that we're experiencing with regards to work from home and the ability to be closer and to your family and having a little bit more flexibility with regards to your time. But I wanted to ask you, and Vincent, I'm going to start with you. I wanted to ask you about, we know that the European Commission has got very strict deadlines in terms of how they want to see deployment take place. But I wanted to ask you if, what was the real impact from a demand side on that the pandemic introduced in Europe, and whether you've seen a definite acceleration, and also from a policy point of view, has the European Commission announced that they will be changing any of the policy, or do you expect it to remain the same?
Well, actually, you said the word. This has been an acceleration. The European Commission has developed a financial package to support, called the resilience package, to support the economy in Europe. Those close to 800 billion euros are actually connected to effort from individual country to invest at least 20% in digital, and clearly indicated FTTH deployment being part of that. So the European Commission is channeling financial investment towards digital investment, including fiber. The European Commission is also encouraging, through a variety of text, a practical, effective implementation and rollout of fiber. So we're no longer discussing why or if we need fiber, but we are actually discussing how to implement fiber better, faster, in a more economical way. And we see the reality of the changes impacting member state policies. We see the behavior of consumer shifting. People are now much more concerned about the robustness and quality of their broadband infrastructure, which is seen, and Gary mentioned that during his presentation, is now seen as a vital link which enable each household to survive through this type of crisis time. So we see an acceleration at every level.
Thank you, Vincent. Khulud, I'm going to come to you at this point. I'm going to read this because I don't want to get it wrong. There's an old saying that goes, managers think they witness productivity when in fact they only witness presence. The COVID-19 pandemic proved to many companies that not all employees need to be present in the office to be productive. There has been some companies and very big corporates globally that have announced a permanent work from home. Certainly in South Africa, we've seen one of the largest banks in the last week announce that they are moving to a permanent work from home strategy. But I think my question is whether you think that companies will try and renegotiate employee benefits. You know, it comes back to one of our key recommendations. You know, on the one side, we're sort of advocating that people are given an incentive, and conversely, companies are saying, well, you're saving time, you know, you're not sitting in traffic, you don't have travel costs, we know how expensive that can be. Do you expect that will be an ongoing issue? How do you experience that in your region?
Well, thank you, Juanita, and thank you, everybody. I have to say that in our region, we can call it uncharted territory in work from home policy, especially for the local companies. It's something new. It's an act of necessity. It's not planned, so everybody was shocked about it. And what you are saying is absolutely true. We have seen in our region that some companies are renegotiating the employees to relocate from a country to a less expensive country in terms of accommodation versus salary reduction. So many companies also, especially here in UAE, we saw them that some companies were renting 2 floors in a building, then now shutting 1 floor, staying with 1 floor, and sending so many people to their home country. Yeah, I think so many things will happen in the region going forward, especially that nobody knows, or I can say that no size fits for all. Nobody knows what's going on and what will happen in the next 2 years or 1 to 2 years. But the most important thing that we should advise the companies and the employees to do everything in a legal framework to make sure that all the rights for the employee is reserved, let's say. So yeah, we can expect so many things to happen. Nobody knows. As we say, we are just, everybody is investigating at this stage what will happen in the work from home policy in the region and globally.
I certainly get the impression that there's very disparate feelings around this conversation about whether companies are going back, whether they're staying, and even within the companies, people have got very different feelings around this. Rusafi, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your region. So Asia Pac is known that it's a very diverse region. You've got some of the best connected countries in the world, yet you also have got some of the countries with the lowest penetration in the world that are really struggling to get there. How has FTTH rollout in your region been impacted by the coronavirus? And have you seen a significant difference, especially in the countries that struggle with penetration?
Thank you, Juanita, for starting the question. So really, as we in APAC, as you said, we we are most diverse region, and we do not have any central kind of regulator or any kind of body also in this region. So that's why, and another part is that we cover very high level of penetrated countries like South Korea, Japan, China, as well as developing and less developed nations. But those underdeveloped and developing nations like Philippines, India, Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, they are really doing great. They are really excelling in the recent year in terms of fiber deployment and the telco sector. So those countries I just mentioned, like Philippines, India, Vietnam, Thailand, they were in the forefront of the year-on-year growth, around 20 to 40% growth rate, and in terms of a huge jump, India did a great job by growing like 230% than the previous year in terms of the fiber deployment. So another thing is that regarding those less developed markets who were previously struggling even before 2 to 3 years, but now they, after just pandemic started, it has come to a just new situation where in India the broadband speed from 32 Mbps average speed, it has grown to like 52 Mbps in current year. And for the Philippines, it has jumped around 35 points from 21 Mbps to 57 Mbps as a average speed. So this clearly shows that lots of things are happening, and we are also updated about those least developed markets, about those happenings which are going on there. But there are around 115 projects are going on regarding FTTH and fiber rollout, and they are actively contributing to the broadband penetration. So I think in next 5 years, I think that will be a huge push for the deployment of 5G and APAC-centric smart cities and IoT deployment. So thank you. That was my comment on your question.
Yeah, thanks, Risafi. Nelson, I can't see you on my screen, but I'd like to pose a question to Latin America. I think, you know, there's obviously a big difference between the experience in Latin America versus North America. And I was wondering, especially when it comes to connectivity challenges, I was wondering if we could expand a little bit on that, just to get a better understanding of how that differed.
Okay, Juanita, thanks for the question. And basically, the difference in the connectivity, as despite the research that we had made, we had the highest FTTH connection, of course, because this basically was for the members. But one important point that we have and we are facing difficulties in the LATAM is the quality of service. If you compare, something looks like strange, because as we have the highest usage of fiber to the home, we had the highest also the problem with download and the speed connections, because this is the one problem that we have faced in the LATAM market, basically because the quality of the network sometimes is not quite good, because it's not just matter of the connection, download, upload speed, but also latency and the connection with the internet to the world. So this is the challenge that was increased due to the work at home situation that we had due to the pandemic situation. So many companies, of course, we are the same around the world, but if you see, the telecom was considered as a priority business, and everybody started to deploy the network. So we have a quite good market increasing in the connection, especially for the FTTH. If you see, there is a lot of a big amount of a decrease of usage using DSL and also cable, and the FTTH is increasing every month in the Latin region. So we keep this challenge to increase the quality in our region compared to the others. Okay.
Thank you very much. Gary, I'm going to ask you a slightly different question, and I'm going to first make a statement. So in Africa, telecommunications infrastructure has never been touted as one of the economic saviors, or potentially the digital economy as a whole has never been touted as one of the potential saviors of our economy. So globally, we know that we are struggling. There's not a country that is not haven't taken hits. Governments are looking at trying to transform the economy. Has the way in which the US government looked at the telco sector changed since the onset of the pandemic? Do you think they see it more as a serious contender, and that there's a greater understanding of what the digital economy can mean in general to the American economy, or do you think that it has remained the same?
Thanks, Juanita. Yeah, that's a really great question. And so, certainly in the US, we're seeing the government really views fiber as mission critical and sees it as critical infrastructure. We had a couple $100 billion worth of federal subsidy bills on the currently active in Congress right now. And what we saw on April 1st is President Biden came out with his infrastructure plan, and he had proposed $100 billion for basically fiber to every American. And the way he couched it was future-proof, long-term solutions, and looking for gigabit symmetric, minimum 100 by 100 megabit symmetric services. That got pushed back. What we saw is there's a lot of big lobbyist groups, mostly large incumbents like cable and some large telcos that push back, that are they don't want a lot of money coming in to potentially provide competition. And so they push back and have been trying to drive down the upstream speeds to something like 100 by 20. But I think, overall, it's pretty generally accepted that fiber is the key to economic development. Also economic diversity. We've seen communities around the country where they might be kind of living or dying by the oil industry or whatever dominant industry, and by being able to put fiber in, they're able to grow a diverse set of industries, and so it gave a lot more economic stability. The other thing is just rural America. I think we saw everybody start to realize the value of remote healthcare and things like the health outcomes of being able to monitor things like diabetes, congestive health, heart failure, other dementia. And so being able to be connected is critically important. So right now, the infrastructure bill, it looks like the compromise is about $65 billion. So this is going to be, in addition to the $20 billion that's already been appropriated for what's called RDOF, Remote Digital Opportunity Fund. And so, we're going to see well over $100 billion spent over the next decade in getting fiber out there. So it's a big push.
Vincent, can I put the same question to you? Have you seen a very definite change in how the regulators and policymakers are viewing broadband and the digital economy as a whole?
I wouldn't say that we've seen a big change. It's still an evolution, as I mentioned previously. What the regulator are trying to do is help practical implementation. The European Union has issued what they call toolbox, which is a repository of best practices coming from a variety of regions and based on successful experience of fiber rollout. And every single member state has to come up with a plan leveraging some of these best practices. And this will need a annual reporting to track progresses and make sure everybody benefits from the experience of others. So that we are getting into the detail and the practicalities. We also see a push for rural broadband, which becomes increasingly where the challenge is, while now that most urban and densely populated area have already been covered. And there, the interesting thing is that as in the past, while in the past we were having a lot of subsidies to enable rural deployment, increasingly we see a lot of startups and alternative operators managing to come with well-crafted business model which do not require state subsidies to have the model flying. So actually, rural broadband and sometimes ultra rural broadband can be open to competition and can work without any state aid. And private investors are supporting the move, and there is no longer any shortage of money, including in those very rural areas.
I think it comes back to the methodology. So if we can find lower total cost of ownerships, lower and less expensive ways of deploying infrastructure, and I want to include in that, you know, those are things like overcoming barriers to entry through very difficult permissions and right-of-way processes and way leaves, etc. I think if there's more project certainty, then you know, it'll go better. When I started out 10 years ago, 11 years ago, almost 12 years ago, I thought that, you know, it was just in Africa where we had these issues, and it doesn't matter where I went in the world. You know, more than a decade later, we are still banging the same drum, talking about permissions, removing barriers to entry.
Absolutely, that's very true. And national regulators, from our perspective in Europe, play a critical role in their ability to coordinate the activity of multiple operators, because in many cases you see co-financing schemes, you see schemes whereby one operator is leading and is sharing the network with others. So that element of coordination to avoid overbuild and make sure that money is actually channeled to the geographical area where it's still where it's badly needed, and not creating unsuccessful competition and overbuild in region. So that's absolutely true, and we see some improvement. So we are quite hopeful that things will continue to grow fast and further accelerate, partly thanks to what we've seen through the pandemic.
So we all talk about, in the US, I know it's referred to as Zoom towns, which are the rural towns that have been proactive in deploying infrastructure. In South Africa, we call it semigration, of people that are just moving outside of the major metros. We have seen a massive increase if we follow the property real estate companies around interest that's being shown in smaller towns. But we also know that connectivity is going to be critical. So we are really hoping that smaller towns will find ways of promoting themselves by promoting their connectivity. That is one of the key components that will make them attractive, because any person that is now on a permanent work from home and that wants to leave the major urban areas and move to a small town has one thing that they will have to have, and that is good connectivity if they're going to remain productive and you know, be able to service their work from wherever they are. Khulud, I just want to take a slightly different stance, and I want to ask you a different question. During the pandemic, many companies went out of their traditional and standard IT policies because suddenly they had to allow their employees to use tools that obviously that enabled work from home. Does this represent a corporate culture change for CIOs and managers to really take a hard stop, reconsider their IT policies to accommodate open source platforms? And do you think that companies will, because they're so against it, they will force a return to the office simply so that they don't have to allow collaboration at a wider scale?
Well, for such applications, I guess it is very important these applications to be used by all the employees as helpful tools to increase the productivity and to help the employees to achieve the target or the assignments they have to do. I think that what happened at the beginning of the pandemic, the companies were forced to open some applications for the employees to be used, no matter it is from the cybersecurity point of view, it's a safe or not. On the long run, I think that companies will revise and they will come up maybe with new tools internally for the companies to use them. So they will reduce the risk of the cybersecurity. So I can't give you like a specific answer whether they keep these tools or not, but what I can say is that we will see so many ideas on the long run if the situation stay like this. And I'm sure the companies will do their best to protect their systems and their data, what they have. And this brings us to a very important point, that using fiber in their connectivity gives more security for all the companies, especially the banks and especially the companies that they have, let's say, high standard in privacy in terms of the tools and the applications the employees use.
Rusafi, I wanted to ask you about, I'm aware that we've got 7 minutes left, so I just wanted to wrap up. I wanted to ask you, what do you think in your region remains the single biggest sort of challenge that you think that we still need to overcome? You know, we've spoken about policy and regulation, deployment methodologies. In Africa, there's things like construction mafia that actually extorts money and make you pay before you enter. So there's like real other issues, and it's interesting to hear from other regions. What in Asia Pacific is one of the bigger challenges that you have to face? And what would you think, if you had a message today for the ministers across your region, what would that be?
Okay, thank you for the question. So, yeah, I think as Asia Pacific is a very diverse kind of region, and all the countries are different, their policies are different, their people are different. So it's really a huge challenge in front of us to just go beyond our capacity. So I think some of the points we should actually look for to overcome those challenges. So first of all, I think we have some developing nations. In those countries, I think the literacy rate is quite low, and the people are kind of do not think in rational way. That's why the deployment style and the business style is not that systematic. It is very kind of segregated, and it's very unorganized kind of style. So that is, I think, those regulators need to first streamline and decentralize their administration to to outside the capital first, and then start working from there. Because if I can give you an example of my neighboring country, India, the country has so many states, but all of them are not that centralized, and that's why. And there are lots of difference even between among those states. So they find it very difficult to create a balance while actually creating the policies. So it's kind of this, and it's really very difficult. And for some other like developing nations like Cambodia, they do not even think of deploying 5G very quick. So their thought is, let it just start the technology, and some other leaders let them take it, and we will see, and we will deploy it. So I think that will take another 5 to 6 years at least to fully deploy those things. So these are some of the examples I can give you. So I think it's really complex problem in our region, and the problem should be solved in a innovative way as well. So this is I can say to your answer.
Fake news is really a big concern, and I don't believe that we're seeing enough from governments across the world to speak against it. And you know, that slows down the whole 5G economy, which, you know, we know from the white paper that we released about 3 years ago, you know, is going to accelerate the rate and the pace at which we deploy fiber infrastructure, and will have very positive results. In closing, Nelson, similar to the question I asked for Rusafi, if you had a single message to the regulator.
It's very simple. Now, I think the two words now is digital divide. I think is this big issue, and how to attend the poor people and also rural areas. I think this is the most important task that the government regulator should have in the coming years. Okay.
Yeah, I cannot agree with you more. I think for developing countries, certainly the digital divide, the pandemic has highlighted the digital divide, and it's accelerated the digital divide, certainly. And we need governments to help through subsidies, or one understands that in developing countries, they've got other social issues that unfortunately divide their attention. But you know, I think we have to continue the work that we do, because, as they say, the squeaky wheel will get the oil. So you know, we have to highlight the benefits. As an association, obviously, you know, fiber to the home represents also that we will stand, or at least have some faith that the work from home will bring many benefits to society and to people in general. You know, we believe that there's higher quality of life, that there's a greater balance. We know that it comes with its challenges, but it's very good for the environment. We've all seen how the pollution levels have decreased since we started working from home. You know, but I think that there's also challenges. We have to pay attention to issues such as mental health, people that feel isolated and alone. But these are things that we can overcome. Urbanization, certainly in Africa, cities are bursting out of their seams. The municipalities and counties cannot keep up with providing services and infrastructure. Work from home will allow us to move outside of the urban areas, and it will result in a rejuvenation of smaller towns, and that will have benefits for everybody. Allow me to thank the speakers today. I'm incredibly privileged to work with all of you, phenomenal minds, and I thoroughly enjoy every time that we come together, the diverse inputs and the diverse opinions and the different thinking. Thank you very much, Gary Bolton from the US, Vincent from Europe, Rusafi from Asia Pacific, Khulud from Middle East and North Africa, and Nelson from LATAM chapter. Have a great day, everybody. Have a wonderful evening. For those of you who's going to bed now, we look forward to hosting you at the next session sometime in the future. Take care, everyone, and stay safe.
Thank you, everyone.